This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Nebyat, and thank you for listening in on another episode today, as we have a lot to talk about on the NBA side of things. We also have some NFL talk as well, but man, what playing games we've had so far with Indiana beating Charlotte and Boston beating Washington. You had the Lakers obviously beating the Warriors, and that was a fun game to watch and everything. And that LeBron dagger over Curry was certainly a shot to behold, and eventually became the game winner of the game. So that was really fun to watch. But all in all, I'm happy that the NBA playoffs are here. We see NBA playoffs start, I believe, on Saturday. On Saturday, we have I believe the first game of the evening will be Miami versus Milwaukee. Then the second game on Saturday will be Dallas versus the Clippers. And then we have Boston versus Brooklyn. And then to end the night, we have Portland versus Denver. So we have a lot of great games to slate on Saturday. Being a Miami Heat fan and looking at that Game 1 matchup versus Milwaukee, I'm going to be excited to watch that. Jimmy Butler has been on the record to say recently that he is locked in for the playoffs. He is ready to go. And then on the other side of things, you see Milwaukee, and you see how they have a great lineup, how they have such firepower offensively as well as defensively. And on the same side of things, Giannis also said that he doesn't really know the outcome of these playoffs, so it seems like he respects and he realizes how great the Miami Heat are, and he realizes that they could get bounced out of the first round here. So we'll see how that turns out with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo for the Heat. And then on the other side of things, you have Giannis and Chris Middleton on Milwaukee. So with that, let's get into, I talked about this a little bit, but let's get into the first segment of today's game. That's going to be the second round of the NBA playoffs, or the NBA playing games, I should say. The first game of the NBA playing games was the 9-10 matchup on the Eastern Conference side between Indiana and Charlotte. I predicted this one wrong. Unfortunately, Indiana did beat Charlotte. I wasn't mad about that whatsoever, but the reason why Indiana was able to beat Charlotte was because Charlotte just didn't have enough experience to get them past at least this game. Also on the record, I think some players on Charlotte, I forget which ones, I believe it was LaMelo Ball or Terry Rozier and company, that said that they just weren't willing to win the game, if that makes sense. So they weren't really locked in. They didn't really, in my opinion, it didn't seem like they had a straight set game plan and strategy going into it. And with that, I mean, the team shot exactly 30% from three-point range, not ideal for this team. And then also they shot 45.7% from the field. Also not that great as well if you're trying to win a playing game, or trying to win a win or go home game in general. And with this, I mean, the adversity, the awareness of this team wasn't really there whatsoever. I mean, when I say that, I mean, I look at the 144 points the Indiana Pacers put up, and really this team didn't buckle down on defense and try to say, you know what, let's try to get a stop here, let's try to make a run. And with that, it costed them a chance to be in the playoffs, potentially in the playoffs in the next playing game. But when I look at the things on the Charlotte side, I see Terry Rozier, who probably might be their best player. Shot 7 of 20 from the field, 0 of 9 from 3-point range, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 16 points. And then when you look at LaMelo Ball, 4 of 14, 2 of 6, 14 points, 4 turnovers, 4 assists. Definitely not something you like seeing on the stat sheet. When you look at Rozier's stats, I mean, 0 of 9 from 3-point range. He just couldn't find the inside of the net throughout this whole entire night. And with this, when you look at the other side of the Indiana Pacers, this is a whole another story. I mean, this team shot 55% from the field, 45% from 3, and Domantas Sabonis wasn't the leading scorer of this game. He only had 14 points, but hauled in 21 rebounds, big 21 rebounds. But the person to really get it done and score all the points or lead the Pacers in points in this game was Oshae Brissett. This is his first season out of Syracuse, 6'7", 210, power forward. Just really showed up. 10 of 14 from the field, 3-6 from 3-point range, 5 rebounds, 23 points. Doug McDermott as well had a fantastic showing, 21 points, 4 of 6 from 3-point range, and 7 of 9 from the field. Definitely a stat sheet you love to see if you're a Pacers fan. So with that, Charlotte was eliminated from the play-in tournament, and Indiana goes on, and they will play the winner of Boston versus Washington, which did happen, and I did predict this game right. Boston beat Washington, and this game was a Jason Tatum game by far. I mean, Jason Tatum had 50 points, Kemba Walker had 29 points, and the Celtics defeat the Wizards 118-100. So with this, when you look at this game, I mean, other than Jason Tatum just exploding for 50 points, I mean, when you look at the Wizards side of things, the Wizards didn't really get a lot of stuff going. They only shot 14% from 3-point range, a not so good 3-point percentage, especially if you're trying to get into the playoffs and everything like that. They also shot 43% from the field, and Bradley Beal led all scorers for the Wizards by leading 22 points. Only shot 1 for 6 from 3-point range and shot 10 to 25 from the field. And then when you look at Russell Westbrook, 20 points, 14 rebounds, 5 assists, 6 of 18 from the field and 0 of 4 from 3-point range. This overall just not the night the Wizards were really trying to expect, so to say. You also look at their bench. Ish Smith, 17 points. Daniel Gafford, 12 points. And they were the only 2 players on that bench to average double-digit scoring. And no one in the starting lineup outside of Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook scored more than 10 points as well. So when you're looking at this, obviously Boston goes on and they will play Brooklyn in the first round. But when you look at this on the Wizards side of things, now they were on a win-or-go-home type mentality here. With the next game being against a great Indiana Pacers team, they knew what needed to be done, what had to be done. So with that, it was going to be interesting to see what was going to come out of that next matchup between Washington and Indiana. And With this, let's move on to the Western Conference side of things, and then let's go back to Washington and Indiana. So, with the Western Conference side of things, you had Memphis beating San Antonio, and this was a prediction I predicted right. Memphis came out of the gates blazing, guns blazing, and led after one quarter, 38 to 19. But San Antonio built a run of their own in the second quarter, scoring 30 points, but still found themselves down going into halftime by a score of 56 to 49. And then after halftime, the game slowed down a lot in the third quarter, with both teams only putting up 16 points after three quarters, and the score was, after three quarters, that is, Memphis 72, San Antonio 65. And in order to win this game, San Antonio needed to get the stops on the defensive end, but didn't get as many as they wanted to, or any more that they needed. And Memphis went on to win this game 100-96. So when we look at the box score of things, and when we look at what things went well for Memphis and what things went wrong for San Antonio, and when you look at the scoring side of things, San Antonio had three guys in double-digit scoring by more than 20 points, and those three players were Dylan Brooks with 24 points, led the Grizzlies in scoring. Jonas Valanciunas, who scored 23 points as well, and then Ja Morant scored 20 points as well in this game. And then when you look at the Spurs side of things, the Spurs didn't really shoot that well from the field. They only shot 35% from the field and 36% from three-point range. They only attempted 22 three-pointers and only made 8 of those. DeMar DeRozan, who was a key guy to look at in this game for the Spurs, 5 of 21 from the field, didn't attempt a three-point shot, but was 10 of 11 from the free throw line and scored 20 points. But outside of DeRozan, I mean, no one else from the Spurs really stepped up when I look at this stat sheet. DeJounte Murray, 4 of 17 from the field, 0 of 3 from three-point range, 2 of 2 from the free throw line, 13 rebounds, 11 assists, 10 points, had a triple-double, but wasn't enough to beat the Grizzlies. And this Grizzlies team was a team that was great from the start of the year to the end of the year. This team is athletic. This team is gritty. This team is tough. They just got back Jaren Jackson Jr. from injury, which is great. He only scored 10 points this game, but was very impactful with 4 assists, 4 rebounds, 3 of 6 from the field, 2 of 4 from three-point range, 2 of 3 from the free throw line. So with this, I mean, the Grizzlies were able to win the last game between these two teams, 129 to 112. So it was definitely going to be interesting to see what games or what game the San Antonio Spurs were going to play, whether that's trying to shut down Ja Morant or trying to just out-rebound in general. But overall, another missed postseason appearance for the Spurs. So with this, you wonder how many more years Greg Popovich has as a coach. One of the greatest coaches in the NBA history, in my opinion. But with this, I mean, I wonder how many more seasons this guy has of coaching, because it's going to be sad to see one day to see him leave and everything. And with this team losing LaMarcus Aldridge off of trade, and then Aldridge having, a career-ending illness to put him out of basketball. Sad story there, but overall, I mean, this team, it was going to be tough for them to really make it into the playoffs, because not only did they have to go through Memphis, but what I'm saying is they had to go through Memphis' first game, but the next game was going to be tougher because they either had the Golden State Warriors or the Lakers. So with this, let's move into the next game, which is the Golden State Warriors versus the Los Angeles Lakers. And this was by far the best playing game there was, and there's no argument to this whatsoever. And with this, I mean, to look at it, the Warriors struck first. They struck hard. The Warriors were up 13 going into the half. I mean, Stephen Curry was making everything from the field. It seemed like everything was going their way, but the Lakers put up 35 points in the first half. to the Warriors 24 points, or I should say the third quarter. So in the third quarter, the Lakers put up 35 points to the Golden State Warriors 24 points, and we're only down 2 points going into the fourth quarter. And going into the fourth, this was anyone's game to win. The lead at halftime went from 13. Going to the third quarter, it was down to 2. And the Lakers were in striking distance by far. And LeBron James was on a minutes restriction because of his ankle injury. The ankle injury he suffered way back when versus the Atlanta Hawks. And then he re-aggravated the ankle injury in a game versus the New Orleans Pelicans towards the end of the year, and that really put him in a tough situation, in an uncomfortable situation as well. And going into the fourth quarter, LeBron James hit the biggest shot of the night over Stephen Curry to take the lead with 3 points left with 1 minute to go, and after that shot, no one else would be able to score. A crazy game to have, especially for a play-in tournament. I mean, when you have Stephen Curry go against the likes of LeBron James and Anthony Davis and company, I mean, you expect nothing else but greatness from any of those guys. And I mean, when you look at Stephen Curry, I mean, he scored 37 points in 41 minutes, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. Draymond Green, 2 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists. Was excellent on the defensive end as well. Was doing a great job with trying to how should I say this? How to try to contain Anthony Davis and try to contain LeBron James. And for the most part, he did a great job on Anthony Davis. But even though he had a great night, Anthony Davis still had 25 points and 12 rebounds. And LeBron James also had 12 points, 10 rebounds, or 11 rebounds, 10 assists. Had that triple-double. Dennis Schroeder as well came up big, 12 points. Caldwell Pope, another starter with double-digit figures. But overall, what a great game to watch and everything. And if you didn't watch it, I apologize, but you were missing out on a spectacular game. So with this, and going back to the Eastern Conference now, I left out Washington and Indiana in that matchup. That matchup happened last night. Washington did beat Indiana. I would like to say I predicted this one right, even though I didn't have Indiana in this playing game. I still like the Washington, which is odds, no matter if they played Charlotte or if they played the Pacers. The Wizards... or Westbrook returns the favor and gets the Wizards into the playoffs. The Wizards shot 50% from 3-point range and were able to out-rebound the Pacers 52-40. And if you ask me why I put that rebounding stat in there, well, it's because that rebounds wins you rings, and that certainly paid off tonight or last night with the Wizards taking it right to the Indiana Pacers. And overall, when you look at the stat sheet, I mean, Bradley Beal led the Wizards in scoring with 25 points. Russell Westbrook, 18 points. Raul Neto, 14 points. Roy Hachimura, 18 points as well. So a solid showing by the Washington starters. And when you look at the other side of things on Indiana's side, I mean, they just had a bad shooting night, 41% from the field. Domantas Sabonis, their best player, 19 points, 11 rebounds, 10 assists, had that triple-double. But overall, Osab Brissett didn't really get things going. Only had 10 points, 4 of 10 from the field, 2 of 5 from 3-point range, 6 rebounds, 0 assists. So I commend the Pacers. They really proved me wrong with that Charlotte game. They proved me wrong bad, scoring 144 points. I mean, good Lord. But overall, this was a fun playing games. Overall, my thought of it was that I didn't really like the playing games. I thought they were somewhat dumb. They weren't really exciting. But after watching that Lakers-Warriors matchup, that was probably one of the best matchups I've seen this season. And then also on the other side of things, on the Eastern Conference side, seeing that Boston-Washington game, seeing Jason Tatum just give it to the Washington Wizards and scoring 50 points was also an amazing effort as well. So with that, we're not done with the play-in tournament. There's still one more game, and that's on Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're going to have the Warriors at home versus the Memphis Grizzlies. This should be a great game to watch. I can't wait. My prediction of it, Warriors, man. I mean, after Curry put up, 37 points in 41 minutes versus the Lakers, it's going to be hard to see the Grizzlies try to stop that. I mean, the Lakers, if the Lakers had problems and only were able to win by 3, I mean, Memphis is going to have their hands full, no doubt. But with that, that'll be it for the first segment of today's podcast. The next segment, I will be re-looking at the NBA playoffs now, since there are some matchups now that are official, with Brooklyn versus Boston, Philadelphia versus Washington, and then Phoenix versus the Lakers. And with that, in the last segment of today's podcast, I'm going to be predicting the NBA playoffs. I'm going to be not only going through the first round of things like I did on the last podcast, but then I'm going to go deeper into the second round, and then the conference finals, and then the NBA finals. So stick with me here, as that and more are coming up on the GSMC Sports Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast with your host, Nebyat. Thank you guys for sticking in on another episode of today's podcast. I just got done talking about the NBA playing games, exciting playing games that we've had between the Lakers and Warriors, the Memphis Grizzlies and the San Antonio Spurs, the Washington Wizards and the Indiana Pacers, the Boston Celtics and the Washington Wizards, and the Indiana Pacers versus the Charlotte Hornets. All great games to watch overall. If you weren't watching them, then you were definitely missing out on those games. And with that, there's still one more game to play in the play-in tournament before the playoffs games are official. The Warriors will be playing Memphis on Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll see how that game goes. My prediction of it is that the Warriors will be able to beat Memphis. It's based off of the last game the Warriors played. I just don't think that Memphis has the firepower or the adversity to try to stop Stephen Curry and the Warriors. So with that, we'll see if I'm proved wrong. We'll see if I'm right. But it should be a great game to watch, ladies and gentlemen. And with that, let's go into the next segment of today's podcast, and that's going to be re-looking at the NBA playoffs. And with the NBA playoffs coming up soon, I just wanted to talk about the matchups that are official now, that weren't official beforehand, that I predicted. And let's get into it. So with this, the first matchup that was named official was the Brooklyn Nets versus the Boston Celtics. So with this matchup wasn't official, but I did predict this one right. I did think that Boston would be able to beat Washington in the first round, or in the first round of the play-in tournament, that is, and then go on to play Brooklyn in the playoffs. So first game of this matchup will be on Saturday. and that game will be at Brooklyn. That is at 8 p.m. on ABC. So with this, I predicted that Brooklyn would win in 5. And looking at this matchup, you look at the Brooklyn Nets, who have arguably the most talented 3 players and the 3 best isolation players in basketball, with Kyrie Irving, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. And then on the other side of things, for Boston, you have a great coach in Brad Stevens. You have 2 great elite and lethal players in Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker. Also a decent defender in Marcus Smart as well. Even though the Boston Celtics haven't proven themselves to be that great of a team this season, with Jaylen Brown out and how many injuries they've had. This certainly has been a tough year for them. But looking at this matchup, I predicted that Brooklyn will win in 5. When you look at this, it's going to be tough for the Celtics to win at least 2 games versus this team, because this team has been ready for at least 6 days now, maybe more, and they have been expecting this matchup for God knows how long. And with this, and the main headline of this whole entire series is that Kyrie Irving is going to be going back to Boston for the first time in a long time, that is. So when you look at the preview and the player stats and everything, Kevin Durant and Kyrie came together as free agents in 2019, teamed up, brought James Harden along the way, and this is going to start the run for the Brooklyn Nets. And with this, is kind of like the matchup last year that the Celtics had in the first round versus the Sixers. The Sixers were without Ben Simmons. They did have Joel Embiid, but they had very little to no help for Embiid. And with this, I feel like it's going to be the same case, except the Celtics are going to be facing the same type of problems that the Sixers were facing last year without having their second best player. And with this, the Celtics don't have their second best player in Jaylen Brown. So we'll see how that impacts this series, because Marcus Smart is going to be handling, I believe, most of the defensive load versus Marcus Smart or versus a James Harden, a Kyrie Irving. Maybe he switches on to Kevin Durant, but to be able to beat this team, you're going to have to play every possession like it's a perfect possession. The Brooklyn Nets are going to be trying to, get these easy buckets in transition as much as possible and try to build a momentum. And these last 5 games for the Nets have been all wins, so they're coming off hot off of the regular season. So we'll see how that impacts them going into this series. So with that, like I said, Brooklyn in 5. It's definitely going to be hard for Boston to be able to contain James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving. Because if you contain 2 of them, let's just say for argument's sake, you contain 2 of those players. One of those players is still going to have a great game. So it's either going to be Harden and Kyrie getting not that many looks, and then KD going off, or it's going to be Kyrie and KD not getting things going, then Harden going off, or Harden or KD might not be doing anything, and then Kyrie goes off. So a lot of options to work with here if you're Steve Nash and company. So with that, let's go into the next matchup that was named final, and that's Philadelphia versus Washington. Now, this matchup should be a great matchup, and hear me out, folks. Not only is this a 1-8 matchup, and a lot of players or a lot of people are probably ruling out Washington to win this series, and for the record, I am too. I don't think that the Washington Wizards are going to be able to beat Philadelphia at all, but I think they're still going to be able to take it to them. And with that, I have Philly winning in 6. With this, it's going to be excited seeing this rivalry between Russell Westbrook and Joel Embiid. This has been a rivalry that has been etched into stone pretty much ever since Westbrook was in OKC back when Paul George and Carmelo Anthony was there. Pretty much started when OKC came to Philadelphia one night, and the Thunder were able to beat the Sixers on that night. But Joel Embiid said some comments to Russell Westbrook saying that if he shot the same amount of shots that Westbrook had that night, which I believe was 33, that that they would be able to win the game. So Joel Embiid obviously throwing shade, talking his stuff and everything against Russell Westbrook. And then the next time these two guys meet was in OKC. Westbrook did win again, unfortunately, but Joel Embiid had the, let's say, highlight of the night, that game, because that game, Russell Westbrook was trying to draw a charge, then Joel Embiid, being the 7-foot monstrosity that he is, just took Steven Adams off the dribble, down the lane, and absolutely posted Russell Westbrook. And then after that moment, it pretty much seemed official that this was going to be a rivalry, no matter how long these two guys stayed into the league. And this got shown more in All-Star games with Westbrook trying to attack at Embiid, trying to bait Embiid with shots and everything. But Embiid has really been under Westbrook's skin, I would say, over these last couple of years. So with that, we'll see what player will get under what player's skin over this game. And it's definitely going to be interesting to see Ben Simmons, the Defensive Player of the Year candidate, go against Russell Westbrook, an explosive, gritty, hardworking player. Kevin Durant said on a podcast with Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson, and had probably the biggest compliment I've heard of Russell Westbrook, saying that there wasn't a matchup that he went into with Russell Westbrook and said, you know what, Westbrook probably doesn't have this handled, Westbrook probably doesn't, have the adversity or the toughness to, get over this matchup and, eventually win it. And that speaks volumes to me. And I don't think it will be enough to beat Philly. Unfortunately, I think that Bradley Beal being injured does play a downfall to the Wizards' system and everything. Even though Bradley Beal has been a man throughout this whole entire injury process, he's still playing out there, still giving it his all. Props to him. But if he was healthy, this would be a different series to talk about. Let me tell you that. So with this, Philly in 6. I think Washington at least wins 2 games against this team. I think they win 2 games on. I say Washington wins 1 game on the Sixers' home floor, 1 game on their home floor. But outside of that, Philly dominates this series. And then the next matchup to talk about, in the final matchup that has been named official, is the Phoenix Suns versus the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, other than the Milwaukee-Miami Heat matchup, which in my opinion is going to be probably the hardest matchup of this series or of this playoffs, but the second hardest matchup in my opinion might be the Phoenix Suns versus the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, hear me out here. Phoenix does have obviously the higher seed. They're going to have home court advantage, etc. But with this, I mean, it's going to be tough to see Phoenix eventually try to beat the Lakers in this 7-game series. So both teams know how great the other one is. With Phoenix, you know how well LeBron James plays. You know how well Anthony Davis plays. With the Lakers, you know how great Chris Paul is. You know how great Devin Booker is. So with this, is eventually going to come down to. It's eventually going to come down to what team can eventually what team can win on the road more. What team can take the momentum away from the other team, and it's going to be a very, very tough series to predict because the Suns have the best coach of the season in Monty Williams. They have probably one of the best point guards in NBA history in Chris Paul. They also have one of the most underrated players in the NBA right now in Devin Booker, and probably one of the best scorers in the game in Devin Booker as well. Then on the other side of it, with the Lakers, you have two of the best players in the game right now. So it's going to be tough for Phoenix to obviously beat the Lakers, just because so many people are looking at this matchup and saying, "Oh, LeBron and AD, they should have everything going for them." So it's definitely going to be tough, because this is going to be an exciting matchup to me. I mean, it's also crazy to me to think that we're getting this matchup in the first round too. You know, this is something that if you told me about after the All-Star break and said, the Phoenix Suns are playing the Lakers in the first round, I would say no, they're not. The Lakers are what? I think they were the 4th seed or something going into the All-Star break or after the All-Star break or something, and that's when LeBron had his ankle injury. That was after the All-Star break. So with this, I mean, it's just an insane first round matchup to have in the first round. But I mean, Chris Paul did say on the record that he has been in tough matchups his whole life, especially since his career has only been in the Western Conference with teams like first with the with the New Orleans Hornets. That was back when Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady were on the Rockets, and you had Dirk and Jerry Stackhouse with the Dallas Mavericks, and then you go to Los Angeles with the Clippers, and then you have great series against the Spurs, and then with Damian Lillard and the Portland Trail Blazers, etc., etc. Then you go to OKC, you play James Harden in the first round in the NBA bubble. You lose in 7 games in a tough series, and Chris Paul was very sad at the very least to lose this game because of how great those young players performed in Shea Gilchrist and Lou Dort and company. And then finally, his last team is, I should say, the Phoenix Suns, and you have him playing against LeBron James in the first round. So I will say this for the Phoenix Suns. One thing that I won't say the Phoenix Suns is prepared. I believe that they are 100% prepared for this matchup, and they were prepared way back when. But with this, it's going to be tough to see them, eventually beat the Lakers in a 7-game series, because when it comes down to it, LeBron James is a mastermind when it comes down to the playoffs. But with this, we'll see how healthy he is, and we'll see if that ankle holds up for him or not. So with that, that's going to be it for the finalized matchups of the NBA playoffs. If you haven't heard it already, the Brooklyn Nets will play the Boston Celtics. And then the Philadelphia 76ers will play the Washington Wizards, and the Phoenix Suns will play the Los Angeles Lakers. So with that will be it for the second segment of today's podcast. And the next segment will be about Joe Burrow. Apparently he is a full go for week 1. And I'm going to be talking about what to expect from him this season and look at the Bengals schedule as well. And then after that, I'm going to be predicting the NBA playoffs. Last podcast, I talked about the first round matchups and and what I predicted out of that. But I'm going to go a little bit deeper this time with the second round matchups and third round matchups, and then eventually finals matchups. So stick around for that and more on the GSMC Sports Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hello all and welcome to the third segment of today's GSMC Sports Podcast with your host, Nebyat. And thank you for still sticking around here on today's podcast. I just got done talking about the NBA playing games, specifically the round 2 games between Washington, Indiana, and then soon to be Warriors against Memphis. But I talked about all the playing games and all the now confirmed matchups in the first round between Brooklyn and Boston, Philadelphia and Washington, and then Phoenix against the Los Angeles Lakers. So with that, let's go into the next segment of today's podcast, which is about Joe Burrow. And now there was a report that came out from Adam Schefter that said that Joe Burrow will be a full go for Week 1. Being a Bengals fan, you guys know this as my followers and everything. I love the Bengals from the bottom of my heart, but this is one thing that I've said for the record, that I only want Joe Burrow to play Week 1 if he is ready to go Week 1. If he's not anywhere close to 100%, then I don't want him to play whatsoever. And with already so many articles coming out about Joe Burrow and the Bengals not drafting an offensive lineman for him, and then taking Jamar Chase, who was Joe Burrow's teammate at LSU, was definitely something that I looked at and said this could be a problem, or this could be the best thing to ever happen to the Bengals. So with that, let's quickly look at the Bengals schedule and see what awaits them Week 1, that is, and throughout the rest of the season. So with the first game of the season, you're going to be playing against Minnesota, and that will be a home game. Just like last season, you played the Chargers at home last season, but for the first game, but you lost off of a missed field goal. It's tough to lose games like that, but in order to get to the playoffs, you have to play every game every week like it's pretty much your last game. And with this, it's not really the NBA and NFL season are two very different things. With the NBA season, you obviously have a lot more games, and with those games, you can sit out a good amount of them if you wanted to. You saw Kevin Durant, James Harden, and a bunch of other players this season that were impacted by COVID and other injuries and whatnot sit out for so many games, but still their teams were able to stay into the playoffs. With the NFL, it's a lot different. There are only 17 games in 18 weeks, with 1 week being a bye week. There's very little time to rest. And with the Bengals, and I've said multiple times that the Bengals are in one of the toughest divisions, and with that, they're going to have to play Pittsburgh twice, they're going to have to play the Browns twice, and they're going to have to play the Ravens twice. So out of those 17 games, you already have 6 of those games already pretty much scheduled. So that leaves you 11 more games to see who you're playing against and how difficult opponents they are. So with that, let's look at the opponents that just aren't in the Bengals division. So obviously Week 1, you have the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings having Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, who exploded last season for his rookie season, and then Adam Thielen, who with Justin Jefferson could be the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. So with that, it's going to be a very, very tough, challenging Week 1. But if Joe Burrow and company is there with T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Jamar Chase, with Joe Mixon healthy in an offensive line that went through training camp and is ready and prepared to protect Joe Burrow with their lives, I will schedule that as a win for the Cincinnati Bengals, that is. But with that, I don't want to do that for every game, like it's a win or a loss. But with that, I do believe that if the Bengals are healthy and everything from top to bottom on the offensive and defensive side, and training camp goes well, I think that we're able to win Week 1 versus the Minnesota Vikings. But then next up, and you're going to be playing a matchup against Chicago, Week 2 at Chicago, so that's going to be your first road game, and then after that you're going to be at Pittsburgh. So back-to-back road games, which brings to my point that you can't really have any resting points whatsoever. You go 1 weekend from Chicago and then back home to Cincinnati, then you go to Pittsburgh, a divisional matchup that could have playoff implications. You never know. There are some experts, analysts out there that say that the Bengals might have a chance to be able to jump Pittsburgh, even though the Pittsburgh Steelers had an undefeated season for I don't know how many weeks, only a couple of weeks, but still were able to make the playoffs and everything, but lost to the Browns in the first round. So with this, we'll see if that game, the Bengals are able to come to Pittsburgh. They beat the Pittsburgh Steelers once last year. So if they're able to replicate that and gain momentum from that win, and learn from that win, I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers, or I feel like the Bengals will be able to beat the Pittsburgh Steelers week 3. But week 2 might be a different story with Chicago and everything. Their defense is great with Khalil Mack on that defensive front. The Bengals offensive line, I should say, will have a tough time with him, I predict. But with that, the next 2 matchups are not against, or the next 3 matchups are not against divisional opponents. You're going to be playing Jacksonville, which should be a win, in my opinion. And then you're going to be playing Green Bay, which could be a loss depending on if Aaron Rodgers is back. But you also have Devontae Adams and company there. And then you also have Detroit. We'll see if the Bengals are able to win that one. That should be a win, in my opinion. Just because Detroit is on the rebuilding side of things. They don't really have a lot going for them after trading Matthew Stafford for Jared Goff. We'll see how Goff fares in the city of Detroit. And then the next non-divisional game will be against the New York Jets, which should be another win too, just based off of the year they had last year. But the signings that they did have in free agency were good signings with Corey Davis from the Tennessee Titans. You also had a great coach in Salah, a guy who was the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. And he was able to bring in a ex-Bengal with Carl Lawson. So we'll see how the Bengals handle that front against the ex-Bengal Lawson. And then between those games, between Detroit and New York, you also have a game against Baltimore that will be on the road. So after that Green Bay matchup, you're going to have 3 games on the road. And then after the Jets game, you're going to be playing against Cleveland, and then you have the bye week. Then after the bye week, you're going to be playing at Las Vegas versus the Raiders. And then the next matchup, or next non-divisional matchup after the Raiders, is going to be the Los Angeles Chargers, followed by the San Francisco 49ers. Then you're going to be at Denver. And then the next non-divisional matchup will be Week 17 against Kansas City. So with this and the games after the bye week, I believe that the Bengals might not be able to win against the Raiders. That might be a tough matchup. The Los Angeles Chargers, that would be a great matchup just based off of what happened last year. I think the Bengals won't forget that missed field goal and possibly winning that game if they win that, or if they make that field goal. Then with the San Francisco 49ers, they're also in kind of a rebuilding process with a new quarterback, or a new rookie quarterback that is, might not start right away because of Jimmy Garoppolo still being there. We'll see how Trey Lance handles being a backup, at least for the first maybe 2 or 3 weeks. But we'll see how training camp goes and everything. You never know. But with this, I mean, besides those 2 games against Pittsburgh, 2 games against Baltimore, 2 games against Cleveland, outside of that, some of these games do look winnable. I think that the Minnesota game does look winnable week 1. I think that at Chicago looks winnable. Detroit looks winnable. New York looks winnable. Then you go into the bye week after the game against Cleveland. But overall, it's going to be tough to see this team, win a division or get into a playoff berth with how many tough teams they have. Not only, like I said before, 2 Pittsburgh games, 2 Denver games, or 2 Pittsburgh games, 2 Baltimore games, 2 Cleveland games. That could go either way. You could go 0-6, you should go 3-3, or you could go 6-0, and it might happen, but the likeliness of 6-0 is very unlikely. But if that does happen, then I believe that, I don't know, anything can happen with the Bengals, like a Super Bowl, anything. It doesn't matter. But with this, and with Joe Burrow coming back and everything, there is some cause for concern. Ever since the NFL draft, so many people were on the Bengals for saying, "Oh, you didn't protect Joe Burrow, this and that, with an offensive lineman." And I was one of those people, I was one of those guys that said we need to protect Joe Burrow and draft a Penny Sewell in the first round. But with Joe, I feel like that was the opposite for him. And at the end of the day, this is his team, and whatever he wants, he should get. And what I've heard through the within the Bengals organization was that that Joe wanted to pick up his teammate Jamar Chase over an offensive lineman. New assistant coach Frank Pollack also peered down at rookie guard Jackson Carman during a rookie minicamp. But on most teams, this interaction isn't necessarily noteworthy, but for the Bengals, Pollack and Carman represent two key pieces of a parlay bet in Cincinnati's big offseason gamble. With this also, we'll see how well the offensive line for the Bengals will be able to handle the blitz. Going against the Baltimore Ravens team, this team loves to blitz him. I think Joe Burrow recognized that when he played against this Ravens team at Baltimore last season, and he just saw so many linebackers, defensive linemen just rush towards that line of scrimmage, and that can be scary sometimes with not that great of protection that Burrow was getting last year. I mean, I believe it. And some of those occasions, you might panic and throw an interception or whatnot, or fumble the ball, but none of that should be his fault when an offensive line is not doing what they should be doing, and that's protecting their quarterback. But with his injury, doctors did not want contact for Joe Burrow until 9 months in, which could lead to Burrow sitting out for the preseason. Preseason games for the Bengals, they have 3 of them. The first game will be at Tampa Bay, second game will be at Washington, and then third game will be at Miami. And with this, and the argument for Burrow's starting week 1 is that if he doesn't go through preseason and everything and training camp, why should he just automatically start week 1 if he wasn't there for most of the training and everything? But at the very least, I think that the Bengals are happy with Joe Burrow's recovery and everything. Nothing of his injury is still a problem to this point, I think. There's nothing that's keeping him from playing football for at least 2 months or so or whatnot. So at the very least, I expect him to be playing. There's, like I said, week 1 is what I've been hearing. But for the most part, I won't be surprised if he doesn't come back until week 4 against Jacksonville. So, I mean, with that, Joe Burrow, I mean, ever since November of last year, he's been, out of commission for the most part with his knee and everything. So we'll see if he's able to, really turn the next chapter in his book and become the next great Bengals quarterback that everyone in the Bengals organization, the fans and everything have been wanting to see. But again, the gamble on not taking a lineman may cause some concern for the most part. But overall, I believe in the Bengals organization and their staff. And the decision of taking Jamar Chase over Penny Sewell might be, like I said, might be the greatest thing that ever happened to the Bengals. It could be the worst thing to ever happen with the Bengals. Now, I'm not that type of guy to say, you know what, I hope we don't make the playoffs. I hope we don't win at least more than 2 games. I hope we win 8+ games, 10+ games this season. And I hope Jamar Chase, like he said, he wanted to break every single receiving record that was ever set by a Bengals player. And I love that type of mentality going in, A lot of people can look at this and say, he's just cocky, he's just trying to build attention and momentum. But at the same time, we love that attention. We love that momentum. And I love something about that in a player. I love that grittiness. But overall, I think the Bengals are headed in a great direction with how great their receiving core is. Their offensive line could use some help, but that could come in the next draft or the next free agency and company. But overall, I'm excited for this season with the Bengals. Should be exciting. And my opinion for the Bengals, I say we win at least 8 games. 8 games is my prediction. So with that, that'll be it for the third segment of today's podcast with Joe Burrow expected to return to the Bengals week 1. Even though he might not play in the preseason, we'll see if he's ready to go week 1 matchup versus Minnesota. I know Justin Jefferson is on the other side of the ball, so or on the other team, so we'll see if he's locked and ready to go. But coming up next, I'm going to be predicting, on the last segment of today's podcast, I'm going to be predicting the NBA playoffs. Like I said, my last podcast, I talked about only the first round matchups, but with this segment, I wanted to talk about the second round matchups, third round matchups, and then the NBA finals. So stick around for that on the last segment of today's GSMC Sports Podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for sticking with me on today's podcast. We're at the last segment of today's podcast, and I just got done talking about Joe Burrow possibly being a full go for Week 1 for the Bengals. Week 1, they will be playing against the Minnesota Vikings. So with that, we'll see if Joe Burrow will play against his ex-teammate and Justin Jefferson. And with that, we'll see if he'll play in any of the preseason games. If not, we'll see if he's able to play Week 1, even if he misses the preseason games. And in my opinion, if he does miss preseason games, and this is my opinion in general, I think that he should be able to play Week 4, if not Week 1, 2, or 3. I think Week 4 is a great matchup for him versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. But overall, if he's ready to play, he's ready to play. Let the beast out. Let the man play. Give him that pigskin and let him throw it. But let's get into the last segment of today's podcast, and that is going to be predicting the NBA playoffs. So with this, I'm going to be trying to predict the first round matchups in the Eastern Conference. Or I should say I already predicted the first round matchups of the Eastern and Western Conference. So with this, I'm going to be basing it off that and then going into the second round and then eventually into the conference finals and then into the NBA finals. So let's get into it, ladies and gentlemen. So if you weren't here for my last podcast, I talked about the first round matchups in the Eastern and Western Conference. I'll just quickly go over those. For the first matchup in the Eastern Conference, you have the Sixers versus the Wizards. I have the Sixers winning in 6. The next matchup being the Knicks versus the Hawks. I have the Knicks winning in 6. The Heat versus the Bucks, or the Bucks versus the Heat. The Bucks being the higher seed, that is. I believe that the Heat will win in 7. And then with the Nets and the Celtics, I believe that the Nets will win in 5. So with this, let's just start off with the Eastern Conference here and wait until we get to the Western Conference. So let's build it up all the way to the NBA Finals. So I have the Sixers in the second round playing the Knicks. So this matchup is going to be an exciting matchup to watch if it does happen, because you have on one side of it, you have, or you can say on both sides of it, both teams have extraordinary big men in Joel Embiid for the Sixers, and then you have Julius Randle for the Knicks. Overall, both coaches, and Doc Rivers, great coach, has really brought that Sixer team to life after so many years of disappointing losses in the playoffs. We'll see if that changes this season. But with this, it's definitely going to be tough for the Sixers to try to, overcome the Knicks in the series that could come to them. So with this, I think that the Sixers will win in 6 again. This is just another tough matchup to predict, but overall, I think the Knicks defense is a legit defense, a hard-working, gritty defense and everything, but for the most part, the Sixers have been great throughout this whole entire season, with Joel Embiid leading the way with his MVP candidacy. And then you also have Ben Simmons with his Defensive Player of the Year candidacy. And then overall, Doc Rivers is a great coach for them. Probably isn't going to win Coach of the Year, as all the coaches voted for Monty Williams, which is a very respectable jester, coming from a team that was great in the bubble, didn't lose a game in the bubble, but fell short of the playoffs. Puts CP3 on their team. Now they're the second seed in the West. We'll get into that later, but let's move on here as we have the Heat versus the Nets in the second round. So with this prediction, it's going to be a tough one. This might be, if this series does happen between, no matter what, if it's the Nets versus the Heat or the Nets versus the Bucks, I hope it's the Nets versus the Heat, being a Heat fan. But at the end of the day, it's going to be tough for the Miami Heat to try to not only beat the Milwaukee Bucks, but to also go into the next round and face a Brooklyn Nets team that's probably going to be well rested against a Celtics team that hasn't been looking well this whole entire season. And with their big three in the Nets, with KD, Harden, and Kyrie, it's going to be a handful for this Miami Heat team, because when you think about it, this Miami Heat team is a roster that can go 9 deep in the playoffs, with obviously their starting lineup being Kendrick Nunn, Duncan Robinson, Trevor Ariza, Jimmy Butler, and then Bam Adebayo. Then coming off the bench, you have Goran Dragic, Tyler Herro, Andre Iguodala, and then Dwayne Dedmon. That's a deep roster to play against, unlike the Nets, who really only have a Kevin Durant, I'll put Blake on there. Kevin Durant, Blake Griffin, Kyrie Irving, James Harden. But after that, Joe Harris can be named there. But after that, with those 5 players, not really a deep roster you can really go into and really depend on to really make tough plays down the stretch. And players like, I'm going to say, Bruce Brown, DeAndre Jordan, and Landry Shamet and company. But we'll see if those players are able to step up. But at the end of the day, I think that I'm not going to play into bias here, but I think that the Nets will win in 6. It's going to be sad if that does happen, but at the end of the day, it's going to be hard for this Miami Heat team to really go all the way in the playoffs. And let me just say this, as a Heat fan, I'm going to expect the Heat to be back in the NBA finals, but if I were just to not go off of bias and to look at what's on paper, the Nets are pretty much unbeatable in my opinion. Or not, I shouldn't say unbeatable, but hard to beat in a 7-game series. So with this, we're going to have, off of my predictions, we're going to have the Nets versus Sixers conference finals. So with this, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris versus Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and then James Harden. Overall, on paper, the Nets don't have anyone to guard Embiid, but when you look at on the other side of things, I don't think they only have one Ben Simmons, so Ben Simmons could probably be on Kyrie to start, but then you're going to leave Kevin Durant and James Harden to an open feast most likely against this Sixers team. And overall, I mean, I think that the Nets win in 6 if this series does happen. But overall, I mean, I am confident in the Heat in order to beat the Bucks and the Nets. But if they're able to get all the way to the conference finals, I mean, it would be a dogfight versus the Sixers and probably would go 7 games. So with that, I have the Nets in the NBA Finals. So with that, let's move on to the Western Conference and see who will be facing them in the NBA Finals. So with this, if you weren't here for my last podcast, like I said, I talked about first-round matchups in the East and Western Conference. In the Western Conference, you have the Jazz versus the Warriors. This is not confirmed yet. The Warriors do have to still play and beat the Memphis Grizzlies, but I have faith that the Warriors are able to beat that team since that game is going to be on the Warriors' home floor. I think that's pretty much sealed and a done deal. So with that, I believe that the Jazz are going to be able to beat the Warriors in 5 games. It has been reported that Donovan Mitchell is expected to be back game 1 for the Jazz after missing a lot of games with a ankle injury that he suffered, I believe, against the Dallas Mavericks in a regular season game. So with that, once the Jazz get back Donovan Mitchell, I believe they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. But overall, you cannot doubt the greatness of Stephen Curry. But with that, there's only one Stephen Curry and just not enough firepower in the Warriors to be able to beat the Utah Jazz here. And then after that, you have the Clippers versus the Mavericks. I have the Clippers in 6. This is a rematch of last year's first round in the playoffs in the NBA bubble. Should be a great matchup, but overall, I have the Clippers winning in 6. I think that Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and company will all be healthy after they sat out a couple of the games at the end of the year. It got them to this point now. So with this, we'll see how the Clippers are able to fare against a Luka Doncic, Kristaps Porzingis and company. But like I said, Clippers in 6. Then next up, you have Nuggets versus Trailblazers. I have the Nuggets winning in 7. These two teams have been playing against each other over the last couple of years, and for the most part, these series, I should say, have been going 7 games. So with this, I'm just going to pick Nuggets in 7 just based off of how great Jokic is and company. But overall, I mean, it's going to be a tough game or a tough series to choose between the Trailblazers with Damian Lillard or the Denver Nuggets with Nikola Jokic. And then next up in the final matchup in the first round that is confirmed is the Phoenix Suns versus Los Angeles Lakers. I already talked about this, so I'm not going to go into it, and I'm just going to say Lakers in 6. And then moving on to the second round of the playoffs, you have the Jazz versus the Clippers. You have the Nuggets versus the Lakers. Intense series overall in the second round of the Western Conference. But let's start with the Jazz versus the Clippers. The Jazz will have home court advantage versus the Clippers, and there have been a lot of woes of the Clippers, not making it to the second round, this and that. But I think this year will be the year for the Clippers to make it to the conference championship. So with this, I think that the Clippers will win in. Oh, this is going to be tough. I think the Clippers will win in 6. I think that the Clippers are going to be able to break down the Utah Jazz overall. It could go 7 games, but if it goes 7 games, I'm still taking the Clippers, even if it is on the Jazz home floor. I just believe that Kawhi, Paul George, and all those players that were on the roster last year realized that that they're going to be on the are going to be looked at through a magnifying glass very closely to see if they're going to be able to go past the first round. And I don't think that they're going to be, focused on that with their first round matchup, but they're going to be focused on that if they make it to the second round. So with this, I mean, it's going to be a tough series, but overall, I think it either goes 6 or 7 games. But if I choose between one or the other, I think it goes 7, and I think I pick Clippers in 7. And then next up, Nuggets versus Lakers, rematch for the conference finals last season in the second round. With the Lakers, I think that they're going to be looking to try to make it back to the conference finals. Same with the Denver Nuggets, but with the Denver Nuggets, you just don't have enough firepower, enough healthy bodies like the Lakers do. I mean, you do have Michael Porter Jr., who is the most improved player of the year candidate. You do have an Aaron Gordon who was brought in off of a midseason trade. You also have Paul Millsap, Monty Morris, Will Barton, everything, but all those players need to be healthy for this potential matchup versus the Lakers. And if the matchup beforehand with the Nuggets goes 7 games with the Trailblazers and they win it, then I think the Lakers will try to take advantage of that. And with that, I just think Lakers in 5 is a accurate description of how this series might go. So with this in the Western Conference, finals matchup is going to be between both of the LAs with the Los Angeles Clippers and the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, it has been rumored that the Clippers did not want to try to play the Los Angeles Lakers in the first round, which they tried to do that by sitting out players, which is a smart move because at the end of the day, you don't want any of those players like Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Serge Ibaka, Rajon Rondo, Pat Bev to get injured or anything before a crucial NBA playoff run. So with this, this was a finals matchup, a conference finals matchup that everyone predicted last season. But I think some people try to move away from it this season because it seems too ironic at the end of the day. But overall, I think that if the Lakers are healthy, if LeBron James is healthy, and Anthony Davis is healthy and company, I think that the Lakers easily, I shouldn't say easily. I think the Lakers beat the Clippers at least in 7 games. I think 7 games. I think that this conference finals goes 7 games, no doubt. And then I think that the Lakers win in 7. And then for a finals matchup, you have the Brooklyn Nets versus the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, if this matchup does happen, the Nets do have home court advantage throughout the playoffs. And, man, this is going to be an exciting playoffs to watch. But overall, if this matchup does happen, I gotta go with LeBron and company, and I think that they win in 7, because overall, I mean, it's going to be an exciting matchup, probably going to be the most watched matchup in the finals ever if this matchup does happen, because I mean, you have LeBron James, Anthony Davis on one hand, then you have James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving on the other hand. So take it as you will, but overall, this playoffs is going to be chaotic. Let me just tell you that. I mean, the amount of 7-game series that we might have and the amount of game winners that we might have it might be a lot to handle. But I mean, overall, there's only one team that I'm going to be looking at in this whole entire playoffs, and that's going to be the Miami Heat. Not only being a Heat fan, but also with them losing Victor Oladipo to a season-ending injury that has been rumored for a while, but they made the playoffs last year. But overall, it's going to be tough for them to make it back to the NBA Finals, because not only will they have to go through the Bucks We'll probably have to go through the Nets and the Sixers, too, in the Eastern Conference to try to get back all the way to the NBA Finals, which is not impossible at the end of the day, but it's going to be very, very hard to do. But overall, I mean, I'm excited for the NBA playoffs. I'm excited to keep on talking about this with you guys and bringing you previews and everything and reactions to every single playoff series. So, with that, thank you for listening to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, that would also be appreciated. So thank you, and have a great rest of your weekend, folks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.